20% of the air is oxygen, made by plants over millions and billions of years. The Earth started out without much oxygen in the atmosphere. We couldn't have breathed then. We couldn't have appeared in the beginning of time on the Earth. But over millions and billions of years, plants put oxygen into the air and enable life to develop and become more complicated. We think that about 600 million years ago, there was an explosion of life caused by the level of oxygen that had reached 9 or 10%, which made that life possible. Pretty amazing how we are so intertwined with the great movements of life, with the great changes that have taken place on the Earth. Our history is ancient. We are only the last of a long series of enormous changes that have taken place on the Earth. I was reading this week about the grasses. You know, there are many types of grasses on the Earth, and those grasses provide much of our food, right? Wheat is a grass, rice, corn is a grass. It's amazing, right? That's a pretty big grass. Sorghum, what else? Maize, oh, that's corn. Rye, barley, oats. All of these are grasses. I'm not sure about barley, actually, maybe. All of those are grasses that provide much of the food of the world, rice and wheat being the two major crops of the world. And these grasses developed about 55 million years ago, according to this article in Nature magazine. 55 million years ago, something happened on the Earth. The climate was changing. It was getting cooler and drier. And in response to that, plants developed more narrow leaves and that gave them, and certain vessels as well, vascular system. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that. But the grasses developed in response to a drier and colder world. And those leaves that the grasses have are better for a colder and drier world. Life responds to the environment. If there's a warm period, leaves get broader and larger. If there's a cold period, they get smaller, more waxy perhaps, and they make an adjustment. How is that possible? One of the most amazing things about life is its ability to change over time. We had dinosaurs, we had all kinds of mammals, all kinds of humans that we don't see anymore. 30,000 years ago, we had Neanderthals, which were like us, but not quite the same. And we had many different kinds of humans 30 or 40 or 50,000 years ago that don't exist today. We have about 300,000 kinds of plants that exist today that 135 million years ago, they didn't exist at all. Most of the plants of today are flowering plants. And the flowering plants only came about 130, 140 million years ago, a new development that changed the world's plants forever, that made new varieties of plants possible and new abilities to change their shape, their form, their abilities to live in different places like deserts and mountains and you name it. Plants were now able to live in places that they weren't before, or at least not as well. And now these new kinds of flowering plants took over the earth. It was one of the great changes in history, in the history of life. We've had many, many such changes. About 2 billion years ago, one of the most dramatic changes was something called the eukaryotic cell. That's a big word that means kernel. Eukaryote is a word that means kernel. And what we have in those new cells are little compartments or kernels that were never seen before in cells. And these compartments functioned differently than before, and they gave life new abilities. This new type of cell also had a larger amount of information in it, which also was a very major change in life. And this new type of cell allowed the kind of life to develop that we see around us today. Whether you're a dragonfly or a birch tree, or you're a mouse, or you're a human, we're all made of these new types of cells. We exist because of the ability of this new type of cell to do the things that cells before could never do, like have sex. In this case, it means sharing your information with another partner. So these new types of cells could share their information with another partner. And that changed everything. And it also gave rise to this new type of cell, gave rise to multicellularity. If you're a butterfly, or you're a bird, or you're an elephant, or you're a redwood tree, you exist because you have different kinds of cells working together to create whoever you are. The human body, our bodies have about 200 different kinds of cells. That's pretty amazing, right? We're made of about we're made of about 30 trillion cells, but about 200 different varieties of cells. So you have nerve cells and skin cells and lung cells and heart cells, kidney cells, what else? Red blood cells, brain cells, muscle cells, several kinds of muscle cells. And all these cells are working together. Now, you didn't have that in the beginning of time. You had one type of cell basically that could hang out with other kinds of cells, but they didn't do different jobs. So cells were doing the same job basically. So you couldn't have a mouse come out of that. You couldn't have a worm, you couldn't have a fish, because those cells were incapable of creating the different kinds of cells necessary for that to happen. And also, the way those cells talk to each other have to exist. Our cells communicate with each other and make our lives possible because of that. Any questions, comments? So this is a lot that we've covered today, right? This is a lot of information and a lot of stuff to think about. Maybe we'll read a poem now. Let's see what we have. This is from a book called Owls and Other Fantasies by Mary Oliver. So let's see. Here's a writing about owls. Anybody ever live in a place where there are owls? You ever live on a farm or someplace where you would hear owls at night? Hoot owls, things like that. Amazing creature, you know. Owls have special feathers that allow them to fly silently through the air, so that a mouse living on the ground doesn't hear the owl coming. You know, the owl wants to have that mouse for dinner, and it has special feathers that muffle the sound of its wings. Pretty amazing, right? It also has excellent hearing. An owl can hear a mouse underneath 2 feet of snow. That's how do you know? Boy, that's amazing, right? Anyway, the world is full of wonders, and you might ask, what is an owl? Or what is a tree? You know, what is a bird? All are an expression of the universe, a living force, a living experience. You know, a bird is a certain experience of life, a certain way that life has arranged itself to be in the world. All life does that, whether you're a human or a fish or a bug or a tree. All life experiences the world. You can make a living in different ways, like, you know, a bird or a fish. But basically, life, you could say, is an experiencer. The form is only the outer cover. Beneath the form, we have the living essence. We have the living mind or consciousness. Consciousness takes the form of birds, of fish, of trees, you might say. All life, from the smallest of things to human beings, are experiencers. Maybe that's the reason for the universe. Maybe the universe wants to experience something. Life flows between the banks of the non-living and the living. The experiencers renew themselves. So here is owls. Upon the dunes and in the shaggy woodlands of the province lands, I have seen plenty of owls, heard them at twilight and in the dark and near dawn, watch them flying over great pond, flying over Rose Tasha's noisy barnyard, flying out oh, oh, flying out of the open fretwork of the spire of the old Methodist church on Commercial Street, where the pigeons sleep and disappear one by one. I have seen them in every part of the woods, favoring this or that acreage, until the rabbits are scarce and they move to new hunting grounds, and then, in a few seasons, move back. In January and February, I walk in the woods and look for a large nest in a tall tree. In my mind's eye, I see the great horned, the early nester, sitting upon her bulk of sticks like an old woman on a raft. I look in every part of the province lands that is within my walking range. I look by Clapp's Pond, and Bennett Pond, and Round Pond, and Oakhead Pond. I look along the riding trails that border the landfill. In the old days, a likely hunting ground, and not one disdained by the owls or much else. I look in the woods close to the airport. So often have I flushed an owl from the pine trees there. And I look in the woods around Pasture Pond, where over a century ago Mr. George Washington Reddy, once a Provincetown crier, saw the six-eyed sea serpent. He witnessed it, he said, emerging from the ocean and slithering across the dunes. Into pasture land it descended and sank from sight. Every winter I stare into the ice of the pond and think of it. Into pasture pond it descended and sank from sight. Every winter I stare into the ice of the pond and think of it. Still asleep, I suppose, in the clasp of the lily roots, for no one has ever seen it again. And I search in the deeper woods, past fire roads and the bike trail, among the black oaks and the taller pines, in the silent blue afternoons when the sand is still frozen and the snow falls slowly and aimlessly, and the whole world smells like water in an iron cup. And I see on my way to the owl's nest many marvelous things, the gray hives of paper wasps, hidden in summer by the leaves, but now apparent on the boughs, nests including one of the Baltimore oriole, with fish line woven into it, so that it has in the wind a comet's tail of rippling white threads, and pheasants, birds that were released into the fall's russet fields, but find themselves still alive at the end of the winter, and are glad of it, storming upward from the fields on their bright wings, and great blue herons, thin and melancholy, and deer in their gray winter coats, bounding through the cold bogs, an owl in a tree with an unexpected face, a barred owl, seen once and only once. Finally, the earth grows softer, and the buds on the trees swell, and the afternoon becomes a wider room to roam in, as the sun moves back and forth from the south, and the light grows stronger, and the blue birds come back, and the robins and the song sparrows, and the great robust flocks of blackbirds, and in the fields blackberry hoops put on a soft plum color, a restitution. The ice on the ponds begins to thunder, and between the slices is seen the strokes of it breaking up, a stutter of dark lightning, and then the winter is over, and again I have not found the great horned owl's nest. So, there are great wonders all about us. We ourselves are wonders. Each of us, an individual in this great world of individuals, each of us unique and yet the same. We share the same blood, we share the same bones, we share the same consciousness, the experience of this world. I want to thank everybody for their good listening today, really good listening. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you also. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Um, I hope you have a beautiful afternoon.
You too. Same with you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Be well. Enjoy this moment in time. Enjoy this life. Enjoy the light, the air, each of us and everyone. Thank you very much. Be well.